Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. In the past 36 hours ago or so, since Donald Trump won the election, I've been spending a lot of time online getting into fights with people. What are you going to do? But I've basically been hearing two different sentiments about where we are and what happens next. And again, to my mind, neither one of them is rooted in a realistic view of what the election told us. The first sentiment is one that President Joe Biden offered today in his address to the nation, which is basically, we're going to be okay.
We lost this battle. The America of your dreams is calling for you to get back up. That's the story of America for over 240 years and counting. It's a story for all of us, not just some of us. The American experiment endures. We're going to be okay.
I'm not so sure that I was persuaded by that. I don't think it's going to persuade a lot of people who are feeling rightly anxious right now. I don't know if we're going to be okay, or that the American experiment in its current form is going to endure for sure. I mean, it didn't after the election of 1876, which ended Reconstruction, to cite one example. We got to act to protect it and ourselves. And to be able to do that, you have to avoid falling into the other sentiment I've seen everywhere today, which is just like total despair. Across social media, I've seen lots of people saying things like, get ready to steal your spine for when they put you in the camps in Gitmo. When you tell people terrible things are unstoppable, that there's no way out, you invite them to surrender to the terrible. So those are two poles of some of the stuff that's going on today. And there's all a bunch of discourse happening, as there always is. I think here's my take on a better way forward, okay? A path to be charted in the vast ground between everything is okay and we're totally screwed. And to me, it really does come down to understanding just the fundamental lay of the land today. I can tell you one guy who I think doesn't really understand that.
America has given us an unprecedented and powerful mandate. We have taken back control of the Senate. Wow, that's good.
It's true, Republicans did take back the Senate. What the final number is yet to be determined. But I really don't think it's true that Donald Trump got a powerful mandate. And it sure was not unprecedented. Now, the other weird thing that's happening right now is there's plenty of people who are opposed to Donald Trump on the left and liberals who seem to want to agree with him, who are like online posting that it wasn't even close. It was a landslide. It was a blowout. Listen to me. It absolutely was not. This was always polled to be a very close election in a very evenly divided nation. It was a close election that Donald Trump pulled out. I mean, he won. That was always an obvious possibility. We've talked about basically in every show we've covered the election. And again, he did win the popular vote by basically a similar margin to the last time a Republican won the popular vote. That was George W. Bush in 2004 after the invasion of Iraq. Now, if you're being cynical, you can make the case that Republicans who want to earn a popular vote majority just have to do spectacularly terrible things, like start a disastrous war in the Middle East that takes hundreds of thousands of lives or incite a violent insurrection. Somehow those are, I don't know, majority makers? But the basics of this election were that things changed a bit at the margins. And the main thing that changed was that Americans overwhelmingly say in poll after poll after poll, the country is on the wrong track. And they say that, as best we can tell, largely because they just feel squeezed economically. Now, there's a lot to dissect about why that was the case. President Joe Biden guided the U.S. out of a pandemic and avoided a recession, tamed inflation while boosting real wages and industrial growth and infrastructure. It did not feel that way to so many American voters. And I think if you watch the show, and maybe you're just turning in for the first time now, I personally am as big a fan of Bidenomics basically as anyone in public life. I continue to believe it was an enormous success substantively. It was the best economic stewardship of a president in my lifetime. It failed politically. We just got the verdict on it. It was, to many voters, more of the same. And it was swallowed by inflation. And that's not a trend that is unique to the U.S. Coming out of COVID, the entire world experienced a surge in inflation worse than any global bout of inflation in 30 years, if not more. Like, No one really who is under 30 had ever experienced anything like this. And let me tell you something. Voters absolutely hated it everywhere, from the UK to India to Poland to Argentina and Botswana, from North Macedonia to South Korea and South Africa. Voters have punished incumbent politicians and parties in the wake of COVID and the inflation. Look at this chart, okay? This is put together by U.S. economist Gennady Rudkovich. These are the results for incumbent parties, which, by the way, span the spectrum, okay, in all the major Western national elections held this year. They all got toasted, lost ground, most by double digits. Every governing party facing election in a developed country this year lost vote share, according to the Financial Times. In fact, according to their data, it's the first time this has ever happened going back to at least 1905, essentially the birth of the franchise and industrial democracy. Now, the Biden-Harris ticket, Harris-Walz ticket, Biden administration, the Democratic Party, was actually the most successful of these incumbent parties. They only lost 7% of their support, and indeed, I think that has to do with the fact that the economic response was better. There's no denying people everywhere around the world basically came out of the turbulence and trauma of COVID and then the supply shocks and the inflation, and they were like, this sucks. I don't like this. So why am I saying this? Well, take that to heart. And I'm not just saying this to like spin things. I truly believe this is the story of the election. And the reason I say this is because all the theories about what to do now and how to resist the worst MAGA plans and win people back to decency and democratic pluralism depend upon understanding and grasping the situation clearly. Right now, the biggest task we have is persuading our fellow Americans and shifting public opinion. And doing it every time MAGA Republicans overreach and pick fights that are going to be disastrous for them, and they will overreach. You heard Trump talk about a big mandate as if this was a red wave election. It wasn't. I mean, right now you've got lots of Democrats winning narrow, contested races in tough terrains, pulling rabbit out of hat after rabbit out of a hat. A bunch of House seats uncalled, the balance of power shockingly yet to be decided. Now, I think the most likely eventuality is Republicans gain a narrow trifecta in Washington. And to be clear, that's terrible, okay? But the fundamental truth about the United States in the last, say, 16 years, it's basically a 50-50 country. It's a 50-50 country, but underneath the surface, there's huge structural things happening, right? This massive class realignment is happening. And what happens is, in every given election, one side or the other gets a little better part of the trade that keeps happening between working class and college-educated professional class voters. It happens in every election. So Trump and the Republicans, they got the better part of the trade, certainly on electoral college grounds in 2016. Then they lost some ground in 2018. Then Democrats benefited from that trade in 2020, right? Suburban voters, more educated voters, worked pretty well for them in 2022, particularly in the suburbs. That's the basic electoral structure. And on top of that, we got to reckon with the information environment that is all happening in. Everything is mediated through social media, which is not some like other place, but is just life. It's not like, oh, the phones and then real life. Like that's life. And the most autocratic forces in our political culture are able to manipulate public opinion through social media and misinformation in ways that are genuinely scary, ways we got to reckon with. A big part of our conversations going forward. I actually just spent several years writing a book about it. But all that said, it was not a landslide. It wasn't a walkover, okay? We've had those in American history. We are not looking at Reagan in 1980 or Nixon in 72 or even Barack Obama in 2008. It was a toss-up race in a bad environment for incumbents in a 50-50 nation that was previously ruled with a narrow but durable pro-democratic majority. I think it still has a pro-democratic majority in which a certain sliver of those folks just voted on other stuff. America didn't give itself over to Trumpism. We got this outcome because 3 out of 100 people switched their votes in a nation that weathered a global pandemic and global inflation pretty well, but not well enough. And it's disappointing as hell. But it's plenty to build a movement on going forward.